Well, for a closer look at those economic figures and what to expect in 2018, I'm joined by Phil Eskeland. He's the Executive Director of Operations and Policy at the Korea Economic Institute of America. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
So in your view, how do you think the economy has performed since Moon Jae-in took office in May?
The economy has performed very well. As you mentioned before, we've had lots of economic growth recently. In fact, the third quarter, it grew 1.5%. And not only the Bank of Korea, but also the OECD predicts that the Korean economy will go 3% this year and into 2019.
And what's giving them so much momentum, you think?
Well, what's propelling it currently is exports, primarily led by semiconductors. Everyone loves the Samsung phones and all the semiconductors that go into televisions and other items like that.
And would you say he's been able to accomplish anything on his economic agenda? He's only been in power, obviously, for not even a full year yet. How much of his economic agenda has he been able to accomplish?
He's become more popular, and issues in the National Assembly are moving along. So he's raising minimum wage is the first major issue that he's made progress on, but there's lots of other things that he has to accomplish on his agenda.
Now let's also look at some of the other persistent issues. We know that young people who are looking for work, we know that that was an issue. What do you see as the challenges to growth that still exist in South Korea's economy?
Well, the first major challenge is productivity. Unfortunately, Korea has one of the lowest productivity rates out of all the OECD countries, but it also has one of the longest work hours. That's a bad combination. And that's in part due to the duality in Korea's labor market, in which there are what is known as regular and irregular workers. Regular workers have sort of the security in their jobs, but irregular workers work on a contractual basis, maybe for just 2 years, and they are generally paid much lower. So one of the challenges is, as the minimum wage goes up, we also have to make sure that Korea's productivity goes up as well. Otherwise, it will put a damper on Korea's economy.
And clearly we know that China plays also a very large role in South Korea. But tell us some of the ways that the geopolitical tensions that China has over the THAAD missile defense system, how much has that weighed on South Korea's growth and certain industries?
Well, I say it's weighed negatively over the last year or so. Fortunately, there seems to be concession on the part of China to go back to the status quo. But during this past 6-12 months, South Korea's economy has taken a big hit, over $7 billion in the tourism sector alone. Lotte has lost $2 billion. Car sales of Hyundai in China has dropped by almost a third. So all these things add a burden on the Korean economy, and it is unfortunate because it seems like there's been more sanctions imposed by China on South Korea than on North Korea in terms of, if you look at the dollar value.
So with that in mind then, what do you think are the expectations for Moon Jae-in's visit to China?
I think we should tamper down expectations on a lot of big policy announcements. I mean, there's going to be no joint statement. There will be no joint press conference afterwards. But we're hoping that the delegation that President Moon's bringing over, the largest in China's history in terms of Korean businesses going over with the president, and then their interactions with other Chinese businesses will produce one-on-one matches and trade opportunities that will hopefully offset the negative consequences of the THAAD missile deployment.
So being that he is traveling with such a large business delegation, how do you see potentially normalized relations then affecting business and the trade situation going forward?
I am optimistic. I am hopeful that the two countries will cross bridges in which they'll be able to restore some of the trust that's been evaporated over these past few months, and that specific business deals will be consummated at these meetings. And so individual companies that have been penalized can see growth in exports to China from Korea.
And which industries have the most potential for cooperation?
Well, I would say in the manufacturing sector, particularly in autos and other high-tech industries. As you may know, China and Korea are very large trading partners. In fact, China is Korea's largest export market. So I think there's a lot of potential for room for growth. And
looking ahead, what's your economic outlook for South Korea's economy?
Well, both the IMF and the OECD predict strong growth of 3% or more for the foreseeable future. But obviously, if there are some provocations from North Korea that move beyond the missile tests, but it might involve some kinetic activity, that could really put a damper on South Korea's economy.
Well, thank you so much for your insights. Phil Eskeland of the Korea Economic Institute of America.